What if I told you history is not a golden staircase of genius, but a chaotic group chat at 3 in the morning, full of typos, panic, and people hitting send on the worst idea possible? Tonight, I take you behind the museum glass. We will meet a soda company with a navy, a pope on trial after death, and an army that lost to birds with knees like drumsticks. I will pitch you the myth, torch it with facts, and leave you with the ridiculous truth. Buckle up. The past is about to fail upward in spectacular HD. 1. When Pepsi had a navy. What if I told you a soft drink once owned a navy? In 1989, the Soviet ruble spent like confetti, so Moscow paid Pepsi in hardware that used to intimidate coastlines. 1 cruiser, 1 frigate, 1 destroyer, 17 submarines, traded for syrup rights and distribution dreams. For a blink, a cola brand ranked as the 6th largest fleet on Earth, like a pizza joint buying a moonlander because the cash register jammed. Pepsi did not patrol the Baltic for rival shipments. They sold the metal to a European scrapyard and banked the dollars. The myth says boardrooms conquered oceans. The truth says a superpower held a garage sale with torpedoes. Capitalism sipped, smiled, and belched bubbles shaped like irony. If you've ever wondered why real history sounds faker than Hollywood, hit subscribe and like, because the next story is even dumber, and yes, it actually happened. 2. The trial of a dead pope. You've heard church politics get spicy. Try a courtroom where the defendant smells like a catacomb. In 897, Pope Stephen had his rival Pope Formosus dug up, dressed in holy gear, propped on a throne, and tried for alleged misdeeds, while a terrified cleric answered for the corpse like a customer service agent in purgatory. Verdict: guilty, blessing fingers chopped, body dumped into the Tiber as if sin floats. Myth says sanctity floats above spite. Truth says power is theater with incense and very poor ventilation. Rome rioted, the political pendulum swung, and Stephen's career ended with rope and stone walls. You can change the vestments, but the plot still screams daytime drama. 3. The city that danced itself sick. Ah yes, the classic medieval rave with no DJ and no exit, Strasbourg, 1518. 1 woman started to dance and could not stop. Dozens joined, then hundreds, in blistering heat on blistered feet, hearts hammering like drums they never asked for. Local leaders prescribed more music, built a stage, and hired musicians because nothing heals like louder. Myth says ecstatic joy took the town. Truth says a mass psychogenic spiral fed by hunger, fear, and rumor turned streets into treadmills from hell. People collapsed, seized, and bled, while priests and physicians argued over demons and humors. It was not a party. It was a feedback loop in shoes. The cure was not rhythm. The cure was removing the stage and the audience. 4. The day a whale became shrapnel. What if I told you the ocean filed a complaint against humans and cited physics? Oregon, 1970. A dead whale hit the beach and officials brought dynamite instead of knives and trucks. The blast turned blubber into ballistic jelly and rained greasy meteorites on a parking lot, flattening a car and blessing bystanders with the worst perfume on earth. Myth says bold engineering saves the day. Truth says no one did the math, the wind forecast, or the splash diagram. Seagulls refused the catering. Reporters fought laughter on live TV. The beach learned about overkill in 1 lesson. When nature asks for a broom, do not answer with a detonator. 5. The war Australia lost to birds. You have heard Australia is tough. In 1932, it declared war on emus and got humbled by cardio. 20,000 feathered raiders hit wheat fields like organized chaos. The army rolled out machine guns, trucks, and headlines. The emus split into small squads, sprinted like marathoners with attitude, and outran most bursts. Thousands of rounds later, the birds were still dining and the soldiers were counting holes in their egos. Myth says humans dominate nature with gadgets. Truth says nature brings legs, numbers, and no respect for procurement cycles. The after action read like a cartoon script with sand in its teeth. Final score: emus by unanimous flapping. 6. America's Moon Men hoax. Ah yes, the scoop that glowed brighter than a toaster and aged worse than warm milk. New York, 1835. A newspaper announced that a superstar astronomer had seen lunar forests, lakes, and bat-winged philosophers praying in crystal temples through a miracle telescope. Crowds gasped, salons buzzed, and scientific clubs debated lunar treaties like a late-night Wi-Fi panel. Myth says expertise equals truth. Truth says expertise plus profit equals fiction with footnotes. Circulation soared, then the story collapsed into embarrassed giggles and competitive envy. The Moon said nothing, the readers learned nothing, and the presses learned everything about attention economics. 7. The Pig That Almost Started a War. What if I told you a potato thief on 4 legs nearly set a border on fire? San Juan Islands, 1859. An American farmer shot a British pig that treated his garden like a buffet. Commanders traded glares and cannon placements across a meadow while warships edged closer than X's at a bad wedding. Cooler heads dragged the crisis into arbitration, and the map got its line without smoke. Myth says grand strategy steers empires. Truth says pride, hunger, and livestock do too. The only fatality was the pig, which history filed under comedic timing and tragic bacon. 8. Poyais, the country that did not exist. You have heard confidence can open any door. In the 1820s, Gregor MacGregor kicked the door off its hinges and sold tickets to a place he invented. He styled himself Prince of Poyais, printed maps, a constitution, and glowing guides that read like a wellness ad for empire. Investors snapped up bonds, settlers boarded ships, and the jungle met them with mosquitoes and fevers that do not respect stationery. Myth says charisma is a harmless sparkle. Truth says charisma with a printing press and a London address is a financial weapon. The brochures promised orchards, the swamp offered funerals. The only thing fertile was the lie. 9. The marathon that cheated itself. Ah yes, the Olympic epic that forgot water, ethics, and shade. St. Louis, 1904. Roads turned to ovens, lungs filled with dust, and the front runner waved at fans from a car for miles like a parade float with abs. The official winner, Thomas Hicks, got fed strychnine and brandy and staggered across the finish propped by handlers, a marionette with a medal. A Cuban mailman ate rotten apples from a roadside tree, threw up, took a nap, then finished anyway because stubbornness outruns training. Wild dogs chased a runner off course for cardio he did not schedule. Myth says pure sport. Truth says a cautionary tale in split shorts. 10. The cobra bounty that made more cobras. What if I told you the fastest way to multiply snakes is to pay per snake? Delhi, late 19th century. Officials offered cash for dead cobras, and the city turned entrepreneurial overnight. Backyard breeders raised fanged inventory, marched tails to the pay window, and smiled. When the bounty ended, they opened the cages and outsourced the problem back to the streets. Myth says incentives are surgical tools. Truth says blunt incentives are boomerangs with scales. You can tally trophies and still feed the beast. Policy without street wisdom is a serpent that loops around and bites the hand that signed it. 11. The War of the Bucket. What if I told you a wooden bucket dragged 2 Italian cities into a battlefield and then retired to a museum? Modena swiped a bucket from a Bolognese well, the way bored students swipe a traffic cone. Bologna demanded it back with the fury of a medieval customer service email. Modena said, "Come and get it," and brought friends with swords. Thousands marched because pride hates empty hardware hooks. Steel met steel over a container meant to carry soup and rainwater. The myth says wars ignite for noble ideals. The truth says ego plus souvenir equals funeral math. Zappolino turned into a harvest of bruised helmets and broken promises. Modena won, kept the bucket, and displayed it like the holy grail of pettiness. Centuries later, it still sits behind glass, the most expensive household item on earth. The invoice line reads glory, and the receipt says wood. 12. The day Boston drowned in syrup. Ah yes, the flash flood that smelled like cookies and hospital wards. In 1919, a towering molasses tank in Boston split with a groan, and a brown wall burst into the streets as fast as a sprinting horse. It knocked buildings from their foundations, trapped horses like flies in amber, and smothered people in a sugary cement you could not swim through. Rescuers hacked with axes while the sticky tide clung to boots and lungs. The myth says industry is progress if the logo looks clean. The truth says maintenance is mercy, and bolts tell the truth. Lawsuits peeled back years of ignored leaks and hasty fixes. Inspectors toughened rules the way teeth harden after biting steel. Weeks later, everything still tasted sweet and wrong. The city learned that even comfort food can become a weapon when the tank lies. 13. Ketchup pills. Cure everything. You have heard the pitch that a single miracle fixes every problem from indigestion to heartbreak. In the 1830s, a doctor boiled tomatoes into a concentrate and pressed ketchup into pills. A pharmacy that tasted like picnic. Advertisements promised calmer stomachs, brighter moods, and the sort of vitality usually reserved for mythic heroes. Copycats bottled red hope by the crate, and the public swallowed the story because hope is delicious. The myth says confidence plus a white coat equals medicine. The truth says anecdotes are not evidence, and a condiment does not have a PhD. People felt better the way people feel better after buying a gym membership. The real cure was probably time and tea. Ketchup remains a champion on a sad French fry, not on your pancreas. The only thing these pills treated was curiosity and cash flow. 14. Heroin for children. What if I told you a famous company once sold a cough remedy so smooth it erased symptoms and common sense? At the turn of the 20th century, heroin arrived in respectable bottles with polite labels and glowing blurbs about safety. Pharmacists spooned it to children as if bedtime needed an elevator to the moon. Doctors praised its gentleness because the early days of science loved confident adjectives. Dependents tiptoed in behind the curtain like a pickpocket in velvet shoes. Families woke to trouble they could not reason away. The myth says new equals safe and branded equals wisdom. The truth says dosage and data beat adjectives every time. Regulation grew a spine, labels learned to shout, and the bottle went where it belonged. Childhood deserves crayons and lullabies, not poppy dreams dressed as medicine. 15. Glow in the dark wellness. Ah yes, the era when healing meant drinking a nightlight. Early 20th century entrepreneurs turned radium into a lifestyle and poured it into water, chocolate, toothpaste, and devices designed to brighten places that should never glow. Ads promised vigor, clarity, and a smile that could guide ships into harbor. A wealthy fan drank so much trademark tonic, his jaw simply crumbled like sugar in rain. Workers painting luminous dials licked their brushes and watched time poison them in slow motion. The myth says nature's mystery equals wellness if the brochure sparkles. The truth says physics does not care about your vibe playlist. Regulation trailed the funerals like a late guest to a grim party. Real medicine is boring and quiet. Real health never clicks in the dark. 16. The summer that forced Parliament to breathe. What if I told you a government only acted when the air itself filed a complaint? London had dumped sewage into the Thames for generations because out of sight meant out of budget. Then came the heat of 1858, and the river bloomed into a punishment so strong it punched through curtains soaked in chemicals. Debates became sprints toward windows that did not help. Newspapers described a stench that could wrestle a bishop and win. The myth says leaders move from vision and courage. The truth says noses pull harder than manifestos. Engineers like Bazalgette built intercepting sewers so elegant they still function like a quiet symphony under the streets. Progress began when the city admitted smell is a policy tool. Civilization sometimes starts with a cloth over your face and a vote. 17. The ear that launched a war. You have heard of flags and treaties. Try a severed ear in a jar waving at Parliament like a haunted mascot. A British captain told a story of Spanish patrols and humiliation, and the preserved ear did the rest. Printing presses fueled outrage until cannons found their voice. The conflict sprawled beyond revenge into the usual chessboard of empire. The myth says justice sailed with noble banners. The truth says theater booked the ship and pride paid the fare. An ear became a headline, and a headline became a campaign. Men died for a prop that fit in a teacup. History kept the ear and threw away the point. If your jaw has dropped more than once already, tap subscribe and like, because this is only halfway through the insane events humanity somehow survived. 18. The day Rome auctioned itself. Ah yes, empire is eBay with swords. After an emperor fell, the Praetorian Guard offered the throne to the highest bidder, while armored men judged the bids like talent show judges who moonlight as assassins. A wealthy senator outbid rivals with promises of gold to every soldier, then discovered that governing a continent is harder than writing checks. Another general marched in with legions and ended the auction with a blade instead of a gavel. The myth says destiny crowns rulers. The truth says cash and bayonets negotiate in alleys. For a few weeks the world had a price tag. Then the receipt turned red. 19. The night Austria fought Austria. What if I told you an army managed a full battle against itself and billed the enemy for attendance? In 1788, a drunken quarrel in the Austrian camp sparked a single shot, then a scream, then a stampede of panic through a stew of languages and uniforms. Cavalry charged friendly infantry, artillery replied with enthusiasm, and the map turned into a slapstick tragedy under moonlight. Orders scattered like geese in a thunderstorm. By dawn, the field was quiet and the casualty list stared back like a mirror. Days later, the real foe arrived and found victory already waiting on the grass. The myth says discipline is a chain of iron. The truth says fear cuts through iron like acid with wings. 20. Touring the asylum for fun. You've heard the phrase, good old days. In London, the good old days sold tickets to stare at pain. For a penny, families visited Bedlam as if it were a carnival where the tents breathed. They pointed, laughed, and poked because empathy had not yet learned to tie its shoes. The city called it entertainment and told itself it was educational. Reform came slowly, like sunrise on a winter morning. Doctors and activists pushed dignity into rooms that forgot the word. The myth says the past was courteous and refined. 21. The tax that charged you for sunlight. What if I told you the government once billed you for the number of times daylight touched your walls? England brought in a window tax in the late 17th century, a clever way to tax wealth without saying the word income. The richer the house, the more pains, the bigger the bill. People answered with bricks and stubbornness. Whole facades were sealed. Elegant Georgian rows turned into blind faces, dark interiors that bred damp and sickness. Doctors preached fresh air while landlords mortared it shut to save a few coins. The myth says taxation is invisible when the paperwork is tidy. The truth says nothing is invisible when you erase the sky from your living room. I can still walk London and count the scars where windows should be. They called it daylight robbery as a joke, and the joke smelled like mildew. After a century and a half of coughing in the gloom, Parliament finally repealed the thing and pretended it had all been very reasonable. You can tax hats, you can tax salt, but when you tax the sun, the bill always comes back stamped with mold. 22. The brick crisis that made buildings fat. You have heard that loopholes are the national sport. In the 18th century, Britain taxed bricks per unit, not by weight, not by wall, by count. Builders did the math and invented the architectural equivalent of a jumbo pack. They baked bricks bigger and bigger, swollen rectangles that laughed at the assessor while slotting into walls like smug loaves. For a while, it worked. Houses rose with fewer pieces and the taxman sulked. Then came the counter move, the law that limited size, a measuring stick at the job site like a referee looking for ringers. The myth says policy is a scalpel. The truth says policy is a ping-pong match and the ball is always money. Walk old streets and you will see the weird hybrids, courses of giant bricks nestled with normal ones, testimony in fired clay that people would rather redesign a wall than overpay a penny. When government priced the unit, trade priced the unit too. The lesson sits in brickwork you can touch. If you play games with rules, someone will play games with materials. In the end, they scrapped the tax and kept the buildings, which is exactly how stubbornness becomes heritage. 23. The Tsar who taxed faces. Ah yes, modernization by razor. Peter the Great looked at Russia and saw old beards staring back at him like forests that would not bend. Europe wore smooth chins and powdered wigs. Russia wore years of tradition on the jaw. So he did what reformers do when patience runs out. He taxed hair, keep the beard and pay for the privilege. Guards stood at gates with blades ready to harvest non-compliance. Men carried metal tokens stamped to prove they had paid, little coins that turned a face into a license. The myth says progress is lectures and pamphlets. The truth says progress is often a receipt and a threat. Priests growled, boyars sulked. A culture learned that appearances were policy and stubble could be contraband. I picture a noble grabbed by the collar, a knife scraping pride into the street while a clerk records the victory. The beard tax did not invent Europe in Russia, but it sent a message sharper than any manifesto. You can draw a straight line from the barber's chair to a fleet on the Baltic. Sometimes history changes because a ruler decides your chin is the front line. 24. Scotland's all in bed on a swamp. What if I told you a nation put a quarter of its liquid wealth into a jungle that hated human lungs? The Darien scheme promised Scotland a golden doorway to trade, a colony on the Isthmus of Panama named New Caledonia, a shortcut between oceans and a shortcut to pride. Pamphlets sang about fertile soil and friendly breezes. Investors poured in. Ships sailed. The truth met them on the shore with fever and rot and heat that did not blink. Supply ships lagged, Spain glared, and the ground itself tried to eat their boots. Letters, home, read like slow disasters written by people who were too tired to weep. The myth says empire is destiny. The truth says empire is logistics, maps that tell the truth, and water that does not crawl with knives. After waves of failure and death, the money was gone, and the dream had eaten its children. Scotland stumbled into union with England with empty pockets and 1,000 bruises. When I tell you that capitalism is a casino, I show you Darien. The house always wins, and the jungle is the dealer. 25. The throw that lit a continent. You have heard of turning points, but few are this literal. Prague, 1618. Protestant nobles walk into a room, read the room, and throw 3 royal officials out the window. They fall a long way and survive, depending on who you ask, either by landing on a nice pile of filth or by providence with a sense of irony. Myth says the moment was a local tantrum. Truth says the moment was a fuse, and the powder kegs had already been stacked from the Low Countries to the Alps. Within months, alliances snapped into place, and Europe began the 30 Years' War, a storm of fire and famine that rearranged the map and the math of power. I love how petty and physical it is, not a decree, not a treaty, a shove. Bodies through a frame, glass in the air, a thud, and the sound of centuries changing their mind. You can teach geopolitics with charts, and you should, but sometimes the lesson is a window and a bad decision that falls a very long way. 26. The time Christendom had 3 bosses. Ah yes, the customer experience where the help desk opens 3 tickets and none of them close. In the late 14th century, the church cracked. One pope reigned in Rome, another in Avignon, each excommunicating the other like dueling bouncers. To fix it, a council elected a third. Now, Christendom had a trio of men in white claiming the same hotline to heaven. Kings took sides, cities took sides, and the faithful looked up and saw a constellation of authority blinking out of sync. The myth says spiritual power floats above politics. The truth says spiritual power is politics with incense and very long robes. It took decades and a great council to haul the thing back into one piece, to retire 2, to elect 1, to sweep the stage and shuffle the paperwork. The damage lingered. When people say reform came later like a storm, remember the years when the weather report said Pope, Pope, and also Pope. Nothing undermines a crown like a second crown, except maybe a third. 27. The dictator defeated by a playlist. What if I told you a man who ruled by fear surrendered to volume knobs? Panama, late 80s. Manuel Noriega ran to the Vatican embassy to hide behind diplomacy and heavy doors. The United States parked speakers the size of refrigerators outside and fed them a diet of rock at a decibel level that turned plaster to dust. Day and night, the walls shook. Tracks looped until the brain begged for silence. The myth says sieges are catapults and rams. The truth says a siege is whatever makes the target break first. Inside, sleep died, patience evaporated. Outside, cables hummed and the playlist kept growing like ivy. After days of sonic pressure and no exit, the strongman walked out not because bullets spoke, but because guitars did. You can call it psychological operations. I call it the most expensive angry neighbor complaint in history. Sometimes history changes when someone refuses to turn it down. 28. The picnic that became a panic. You have heard that war teaches respect quickly. The first big battle of the American Civil War taught it with spilled champagne. Washington society packed hampers and parasols, rode out to a pleasant hill, and prepared to watch the Union roll the Confederacy like a matinee. The field refused the script. Smoke thickened, lines bent, and the blue coats began to fall back through the dust toward the same roads the spectators had used. Carriages tangled with gun carriages. Families tried to flee while soldiers tried not to die, and the highway to the Capitol became a funnel of fear. The myth says war is a drama you can observe. The truth says war is a storm that eats the audience. The lesson stuck fast. No more picnics with artillery. No more myths of a quick afternoon. From then on, the city learned to read casualty lists instead of menus, and the hill learned a new name made of running feet. 29. The bear who became a brother in arms. Ah yes, the enlisted soldier whose paws left prints on history. Polish troops found a bear cub in the Middle East and adopted him like a scruffy mascot with endless appetite. To bring him aboard a British troopship, they gave him rank and a number. Private Wojtek learned to carry ammo crates, learned to ride in trucks, learned that soldiers share cigarettes and stories and boredom. At Monte Cassino, he hauled shells with calm focus while the sky screamed. A cartoon of him gripping a shell became the unit's emblem. The myth says war is only men and machines. The truth says war is also the strange bonds that keep men moving toward the next ridge. After the war, he retired to a zoo where veterans visited and called his name, and he remembered. I imagine him on hind legs, sniffing the air for old voices. The file says Ursus Arctos. The roll call says brother. 30. The jockey who won after his heart stopped. What if I told you a man broke a lifelong losing streak by dying at full gallop? New York, early 20th century. Frank Hayes climbed onto a long shot named Sweet Kiss, and somewhere in the chaos of hooves, his heart quit. He did not. His body locked into the saddle by habit and fate, and the horse kept running like a small miracle in brown. They crossed the line first. Officials checked. The victory stood. The myth says triumph demands more life than you have. The truth says sometimes momentum finishes what courage begins. The mare never raced again, perhaps because horses know things we do not. The papers called it eerie. I call it a headline that reads like a ghost story with a wreath and a stopwatch. If you ever need proof that history writes punchlines no writer would dare, look at a finish photo where the winner is already gone. 31. The day it rained meat. What if I told you the sky over Kentucky once sneezed steak tips? In 1876, chunks of flesh fell from a blue noon like confetti from a butcher's parade. Neighbors tasted samples because curiosity is stronger than common sense and declared it lamb or deer. Modern science points at vultures that overate and ejected mid-flight, a synchronized gastric airstrike that turned a farmyard into a deli on nightmare mode. The myth says miracles fall from heaven. The truth says biology has a disgusting sense of humor. I picture a picnic pausing while someone says, check the weather. Forecast meat with a chance of questions. God did not cater, the buzzards did. The punchline was chewy. 32. The college craze of swallowing fish. You've heard alumni tales about wild campus traditions. Try the one where students swallowed live goldfish to impress a date and a local paper. In 1939, one Harvard dare went viral by telegram, and soon dorms nationwide kept bowls like snack dispensers. Counts were printed like sports scores. An MIT tinkerer even rigged a swallowing contraption because engineers cannot meet a problem without adding tubes. The myth says youth equals rebellion. The truth says boredom plus ego equals menu. Animal groups fumed, administrators sighed. The fad died faster than midterms. If your grandpa claims college was gritty, remember he might mean he ate your pet and called it culture. 33. The night a comet sold umbrellas. Ah yes, the cosmic scare that turned into a shopping spree. In 1910, news spread that Halley's Tale contained poison gas and the world might inhale doom. Grifters sold anti-comet pills and special umbrellas as if fabric could stop the sky. Crowds watched the heavens, held their breath, and then did not die. The myth says science promised death. The truth says sloppy headlines sold panic, and panic sold merchandise. The comet sailed on, silent and magnificent, while Earth learned a familiar lesson. Fear is retail with stars for packaging. If you ever wonder why rumor travels faster than light, check the receipt. 34. The fashion that set parties on fire. What if I told you high society once dressed like lanterns? Mid-19th century crinolines turned skirts into domes wide as dinner tables, hoops of whalebone and steel wrapped in fabrics that loved a spark. Women drifted past fireplaces and became torches in seconds. Newspapers tracked the casualties with grim calm. Manufacturers responded by making the silhouettes bigger and the fabrics sometimes worse because status outruns common sense. The myth says elegance is safety by candlelight. The truth says elegance can be kindling with manners. When you picture a ballroom, add the smell of singed silk and the gasp that follows. Beauty should not arrive with a fire brigade. 35. The war that started after a soccer match. You have heard fans say this game is life or death. In 1969, El Salvador and Honduras tested the slogan. Migration, land reform, and political heat primed both countries. A violent World Cup qualifier became the spark. Within days, jets launched, tanks rolled, and towns bled for 4 nights that history now files as the football war. The myth says sport unites nations. The truth says sport magnifies whatever is already shaking. A ceasefire came. Borders shifted on paper more than on ground. The stadium quieted. The anger did not. If you think a score fixes policy, you have never watched a flag weep. 36. The London Beer Tsunami. Ah yes, the pub disaster you would not believe sober. In 1814, a massive vat of porter burst in a London brewery, its failure kicking other vats awake. A dark wave tore through alleys, smashed walls, and drowned people in a flood that tasted like a tragic toast. Courts called it an act of God because humans hate writing. I ignored a leak. The myth says accidents are random. The truth says pressure talks and bolts answer. Families mourned while bystanders smelled yeast for weeks. If anyone ever tells you beer's harmless, tell them about a tidal pint that carried coffins. 37. When a city released 1 million balloons. What if I told you the sky over Cleveland once looked like soda foam? In 1986, a charity launched nearly 1.5 million balloons to set a record and give the skyline a candy-colored halo. A cold front shoved the mass downward. Balloons clogged streets, spooked horses, shut a runway, and turned a lake search into chaos because a bobbing balloon looks too much like a bobbing head. Lawsuits piled up like deflated latex. The myth says spectacle equals joy. The truth says weather does not clap. If you want a metaphor for unintended consequences, picture a city under a soft plastic storm that nobody asked for. 38. The trials where pigs wore clothes. You have heard justice is blind. In medieval Europe, it sometimes pretended animals had lawyers. Courts tried pigs for killing, cows for trampling, even insects for ruining crops. Bailiffs dressed a condemned pig in human clothes for a public hanging because someone thought symbolism needed pants. The myth says law is rational in every century. The truth says law is theater until evidence takes the stage. Priests debated sin in creatures that never confessed. Crowds applauded morality plays while grain still failed. Civilization looked in the mirror and saw a costume. 39. The man who sold the Eiffel Tower. Ah yes, the con so audacious Paris wanted to applaud. In 1925, Victor Lustig posed as a government official and invited scrap dealers to bid on dismantling the Eiffel Tower, a structure he framed as costly and unloved. He picked the most corrupt bidder, accepted a bribe to seal the deal, and vanished with the cash. Then he returned a month later to try again, because confidence men reload faster than shame. The myth says cities are too savvy to fall for theater. The truth says desire fogs the glasses of industry. If trust had fingerprints, his were everywhere and nowhere. 40. The laughter that closed schools. What if I told you a laugh can break a village? Early 1960s, Western Tanzania. A few schoolgirls began laughing and could not stop. The contagion spread across classrooms, homes, and towns. The episodes were not joy. They were spasms that hijacked breath and sleep. Schools shut for months, work faltered. Outsiders wrote it off as superstition. Insiders recognized stress, fear, and the pressure of rapid change exploding through nervous systems. The myth says laughter heals. The truth says laughter can also be a storm inside the body. When the wave passed, it left no punchline, only silence that knew what it had survived. Here's the punchline I can't unsee. None of these disasters were random. They were the honest children of fear, pride, lazy math, and incentives pointing the wrong way. We built temples to certainty and worshiped them with bad decisions. Armies lost to birds, empires sold by the lot, science turned into theater, and still we stumbled forward. That is the real comfort. Humans fail loudly, then learn slowly, then try again. So I leave you with 3 tools that never expire: curiosity, skepticism, humor. If this tour rewired a neuron or two, hit like and subscribe so we can keep laughing our way to the truth.